I bring him on to the virtual lectern. I'm going to introduce him. Carl was selected out of over 2,000 auditioners to the prestigious Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London and spent 20 years on stage as an actor-director. But he then decided to go into the business where he rose from the part held in a record store to a director of information systems. Excellent. In 2009, Carl was a finalist in the World Champion of Public Speaking, which helped launch his speaking career. He now co-hosts the Oval Table podcast for a small business, speaks around the country and in England, and is about to launch the Alpha Dog Group, where he and Douglas Bauer provide the tools for friction-free communication and team building. So everyone, please give a warm welcome to Carl as he talks about the business lessons from the stage. Carl, you may now take the virtual lecture.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say that when people think about theater and the arts, when they think about music, plays, musicals, ballet, dance, any form of the performing arts, they think of flamboyant people, people who are sometimes wild and sometimes creative and sometimes brilliant. But make no mistake here, there's a lot of business going on behind the scenes. And what I found in my 20 years in life in the theater is that the business lessons I learned there worked perfectly in real business. Not that theater isn't a real business, but in things like manufacturing, retail, transportation, even down to a local restaurant or your favorite hot dog stand. All the principles are the same. So let me start at the beginning. First of all, I was born a short, cross-eyed kid with a profound stutter. Now, in my early years, this was a problem. Now, as you may know, children are cruel. But even adults today, you know the one handicap that you're allowed to make fun of and to ridicule? It's stuttering. We see it here in the United States with a president who happens to have a stutter, and people say he's too old to be president simply because he has a stutter. And they say he's mentally disabled. Well, I went through that same thing as a child. Growing up, people would get in my face and go, duh, moron, you're a retard. Yeah, that's the word we used, retard. And I put up with that for a lot of years. And for a lot of years, it hurt. Until I realized what a gift it was. Because you see, what I found out was that it is so much easier to get ahead and to reach the top when people underestimate you. And that's what happened to me going forward. I mean, something as small now, but at the time it was a big thing. I was elected student body president of my high school by the very people that used to call me a moron and a retard, because they saw the value that I was bringing. Later on, in fact, this is interesting. My very first paycheck was as a professional ballet dancer. If you saw me now, you'd realize, what, really? You were in ballet? Yeah, I was. And my first really great mentor was a gentleman named David Lachine and his wife, Tanya Ryabochinska. Now, we didn't have Google back then. This was in the late 60s, early 1970s. And so I knew David was important, but I didn't know how important. But once I could research him, I found out that he was one of the giants, he and Tanya They were the giants of the ballet world in the 1930s and the 1940s. He was the head of the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. I didn't know that. Probably a good thing I didn't know that. But the point about David is he, for some reason, took a shining to me. Now, remember, I'm a short kid. And for some reason, he took me under his wing. He began putting me in everything he did. There were better dancers than me. There were people who had the figure, who were long and lanky and they had the form. But he kept putting me in. Why? And then it dawned on me. It was because I showed up. Half the way to success is just showing up. And he also saw that I had fun and the joy that I had in the music and the movement. He saw that. And that's what he wanted in his productions. And I am eternally grateful to him for having seen that in me and making me see it in myself. It was the joy. And joy makes fun, and fun makes the pain worth it. And ask anybody who's ever been a dancer, there's a lot of pain involved. Well, when I went on to college, one of the professors there was a director, Michael Gordon, actually a rather famous Hollywood director. He did the film of Cyrano de Bergerac, which won the Academy Award for Best Actor. If you may have seen the Rock Hudson, Doris Day films, he directed those. And so Michael was very well known. But after my freshman year in college, I was walking down the hall and he said, "Carl, come here, come into my office." And I said, "Okay, great. Happy to talk to Michael." And he sat me down in front of his desk and he looked at me right in the eye and he said, "You're not a bad actor, but you don't have matinee idol looks. You just don't have the look that people are going to want to pay to see. You may want to think of doing something else." Imagine 18-year-old kid hearing that. And he's been working all his life towards this, his young life. At first, I was crushed. But by the time I hit the outside of the building, I was determined. And I decided, I want this really badly. And I will show him. 2 years later, he had taken me under his wing. And when it came time for the professors to choose the outstanding student for the Natalie Wood Award, which was a scholarship, he put me up and convinced them to give the award to me. It took 3 years, but the hard work, it pays off. It pays off, even if you're not self-promoting yourself. In fact, self-promotion will get you quick results. But going in there, rolling up your sleeves and doing the work, that gives you the long-term reward. And that was the first time I had received that. The next one was just a week later when I was, in fact, accepted into the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. Now, when I was there, my very first Shakespearean lead on a London stage, think about that, an American doing a Shakespearean lead on a stage in London. No pressure, right? Well, we were doing Winter's Tale, which is a very difficult play. It's one of Shakespeare's problem plays, they call them. My leading lady was Juliet Stevenson. You may have seen her in film. She's now Dame Juliet Stevenson. Well, we rehearsed that. And we kept getting no feedback. We would rehearse a scene and what do you think? And the director would sit in the back, drinking his beer after beer after beer. And so we really weren't sure how this was going to go on opening night. Well, I am proud to say it was a total disaster, a complete mess. You can imagine how I felt as an American making his Shakespearean debut. Well, after that opening night, I went to the bar at the Academy, and about 3 feet away from me is the director. And drinking his hand was like permanently attached to a beer mug. And he turned to me and he said, "Where do you suppose we went wrong?" Thank God murder is illegal, because it probably would have happened that night. But then I thought of all those rehearsals of him sitting in the back, drinking his beer, giving us no feedback whatsoever. And I realized, part of the fault was us. When you find yourself in a position in business or anywhere where there's no leadership, it's time to lead from the bottom up. And we could have done that, and we should have done that, because we knew a lot about theater. Here's looking back on it, what we should have done. We should have rehearsed scenes, picked one of the cast members, say, "You're director. Okay, go. We're going to rehearse this scene. Tell us what you think." It wouldn't have been the best production in the world, but it would have been a heck of a lot better than what we had. And so that's my lesson there. Where there's no leadership, pick up the reins and start leading. While my time in London, I worked at the National Theatre of Great Britain. In fact, I was there for the royal opening. At that time, Angela Lansbury was in Hamlet, that Albert Finney was playing Hamlet. And the reviewers were not very kind to Miss Lansbury. And the actors in the production, young actors, at the start of their career, she had already had a very distinguished one, turned their backs on her. Hardly anyone would even talk to her, passing in the hall, which I found incredible for a lady who had had quite an illustrious career. You know what she did on the last night she was there, because she had to leave to accept a role on Broadway? She bought cases of the finest champagne she could lay her hands on, and a spread you would not believe for all the cast, all the crew members. That was her goodbye gift to everybody. I'll never forget her. I'll never forget the class that she showed, and demonstrated that showing class at all times, especially the rough times, means everything. And that role that she went on to play in Broadway was in Sweeney Todd, one of the great iconic performances in Broadway history. Anyone who saw it will never forget it. And she became a Broadway legend because of that role. When I came home to Los Angeles, I and a group of actors formed a theater company, the 21st Street Theater Company. And the first show, which I directed, turned out to be a surprise hit. The LA Times glowed about it. Every newspaper gave it great reviews. And suddenly people began burning up the phone lines, calling us to get tickets. And they'd ask, "Well, how much are the tickets?" And we'd tell them $5. They said, $5. What's wrong? Did you lose the leading actors? What's the problem? And we had to explain to them, no. The production was cheap to do, and we wanted to pass that on to our audiences. But we had to do some convincing because our price was too low. Lesson learned. And this is something that goes with what was said earlier this evening. Never undervalue yourself or your product. We immediately raised our prices, and then that was the end of that. We never heard any more complaints about our prices. It never occurred to me that people would complain that our prices were too low. That was a new one for me. What I also learned at that theater was that collaboration, it's the best way to work, and getting the right people to collaborate with, that really works. And always working with people better than you makes you better. And always remember, you learn more from success, from failure, than you do from success. Success is the result of failure. Finally, and this is the last point I'll pass on to you, communication. I had a wonderful director in London, Jeff Bullen, wonderful guy. But he loved the French language. In fact, he translated French plays. And very often when he was giving me a direction, he would say, well, now, Carl, I'd like you to go over to the chair and I'd like to feel a certain je suis vif enfant. And I'd have to say, what the hell are you saying? You always do that at the most important part of the sentence. And that's a little lesson about communication that is so important in business. Make sure you send a clear message. And who's responsible for the receiver getting the message and understanding it? It's the sender. They're the ones responsible. Follow that rule, and I think you're halfway to being a great leader. Make sure the message is understood. It's your responsibility. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Wow. Wow. What an amazing art talk. Thank you, Toastmaster Carl, for an excellent art talk. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable today. You gave us a window into your life, into things that you experienced and how you overcame them. And I tremendously learned a lot from your experience. Your testimony was wonderful. And we appreciate it again. Could everyone please open the mic and give them a round of applause for an amazing art talk. Great job. Thanks again, Toastmaster Carl. Now we're going to transition to the preparing